Good evening, everyone. Tonight we'll be reading Getting Closer to God, chapter 6. So believe it or not, chapter 6. Let's get into it. The difficult we do immediately. The impossible takes a little longer. That's a sign you may have seen in the store, garage, or print shop. Yes, the impossible does take longer. A lot longer. Moses was learning an important lesson. If he was willing to do what was impossible, God was responsible for doing the impossible. Let me read that again. Moses was learning an important lesson. If he was willing to do what was possible, God was responsible for doing the impossible. God never expects us to do what he can do, only what... Let me read that again. God never expects us to do what only he can do. But he does expect us to do what we can do. Christ would never have expected his disciples to raise Lazarus from the dead, but he did ask them to lose Lazarus from his grave clothes once he came staggering out of the cave. He would never have expected the disciples to multiply 5 loaves and 2 fish, but he did accept a boy's lunch and asked the disciples to serve the people once the miracle was in progress. In Egypt, several months of terrifying plagues had done their work, and when the firstborn son of every family was dead, Pharaoh finally gave his blessing for the departure of the Israelites. And this time he was serious. Or was he? After the Israelites had traveled for some days in the southeasterly path and camped at Etham, God asked them to turn back to the camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. This change of direction would lead Pharaoh to conclude that the Israelites were confused. Let me switch lights real quick. Better. When word reached him, he surmised that they were wandering aimlessly in the land and were trapped in the wilderness. Now that the firstborn sons of Egypt had been buried, Pharaoh reconsidered his decision to let Israel go. He thought of the economic hardship that would engulf him once the slaves were gone. He was stung by the humiliation of having to give in to their demands. Not only did he change his mind, but his servants did too. They asked, "What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" The Red Sea is literally the Sea of Reeds. The exact route the Israelites took is debated, but it was likely what is today called Lake Bala. In the northeastern part of the Sinai Peninsula, we don't know how deep this lake was, but there was enough water to drown the Egyptians. This triggered a final conflict that proved the mighty power of God. Let's walk through the events of the next few days, taking special note of the roles Pharaoh, Moses, and God played in this high drama. And then we will see what this story has to say to us in our own predicaments. Pharaoh pursued God's people. Pharaoh hastily recruited his army to chase after the Israelites and retrieve them. His 600 select chariots were re-aided and put in the charge of his best officers. His army was the best in the world. The Egyptians were so far advanced that they used iron for their chariots. They had sharp spears and a strong contingent of horses. In contrast, the Israelites had no military equipment. They had nothing more than unleavened bread in their satchels and a few sticks they used to herd their sheep and cattle. They had neither chariots nor horses. They were helpless in the presence of their notorious enemy. Pharaoh probably intended to terrorize the whole congregation by killing some of the Israelites and bringing the rest back to regroup for another round of slave labor. His wounded pride would have demanded no less. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them camping by the sea, besides Pharhathroth, in front of Baal-zephon. The Israelites were intimidated by this excessive of use. As Pharaoh drew near, they looked back and saw the approaching clouds of dust and felt betrayed. They cried out to the Lord, but had no confidence that he could help them. Then they turned on Moses and said to him sarcastically, "Is it because there was no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is it not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians'? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." Fear distorted their memories. Life in Egypt had not been easy. In fact, the slavery was cruel and demanding. Faced with this crisis, they remembered the past like they wanted it to be. Never before had they faced a predicament that was so overwhelming, and there was nothing they could do about it. Not even Egypt was like this. We've all met Christians who are shocked when they learn this lesson. Belonging to God does not exempt us from the sufferings of life. Let me read that again. Belonging to God does not exempt us from the sufferings of life. I'd argue, because the Lord said in the word, he said, "For the world hates you. Do not worry, because the world hated me first." I know it's not exactly how he said it, but it's something along those lines. So let's continue. In fact, I've met some people who say that they have had more trials since they were saved than previously. The reason is obvious. Serving Pharaoh is sometimes easier than trying to get away from them. New Christians sometimes admit that they are now facing a whole series of battles they knew nothing of before their conversion. Something wonderful has happened to them, and the enemy does not like it. Hold on a second. Sorry about that, it was a little noisy. Let's see where I can set this camera. Right about there. Let's continue. Serving Pharaoh is sometimes easier than trying to get away from him. New Christians sometimes admit that they are now facing a whole series of battles they knew nothing of before their conversion. Something wonderful has happened to them, and the enemy does not like it. This is especially true of those who were trapped in false cults, or those who were of particular help to Satan's cause. No matter how terrible the bondage was, the fear of trying to get free is even more terrifying. Pharaoh never lets his servants go without a struggle. Pharaoh never lets his servants go without a struggle. Interesting. You may be a victim in Egypt, but even that may seem better than trying to be a free man in Canaan. When you serve the devil, you are exempt from some conflicts because you are in league with him, as long as you are an obedient slave, doing whatever your desires dictate. The battle appears manageable. When you take the time to reflect, you realize that Satan is a no-win situation. He keeps demanding more while he pays you less. You always keep making more concessions until you are broken down by his cruel control. He is only temporarily appeased. Yet, as bad as the situation is, it might for a time get worse, even worse when you make it a move to be free. Take a step from under his control and he flies into a rage. The dust of Pharaoh's chariots eclipsed the Israelites' view of God. That cloud of dust seemed greater than the cloud of glory that accompanied the nation. This situation called for the extraordinary intervention of God. Moses believed God's promises. Pity Moses. How would you like to have 2 million people angry with you? 2 million fingers all pointed in the same direction. Moses was in a tight place. A wonderful place to show character, grace, and faith. A place where God alone could rescue him. When we are in a corner, our hearts is exposed. Our greatest temptation is to find an escape hatch, the nearest available exit that will appear to us to get us out of our dilemma. Often, such an exit is created by Satan, who warns us to sin rather than to trust God. The Pharaoh of our souls offer an easy way with a deadly trap, skillfully hidden. What options do we have when we are in a tight place? There are dozens of attractive but deadly escape routes. Perhaps we think we can lie our way out of the difficulty, cheating on an exam, falsifying an application or a resume. All of these become a possible means of escape. A couple I know chose to live together before they were married in order to save money. One apartment is cheaper than two, right? Makes sense. That was their response to economic hardship. Abortion is a popular means of escape for a burdensome moral situation. Even adultery can appear to be an escape from a difficult dilemma. A Chicago newspaper carried a story about a couple who borrowed $150K for a business venture that went sour. The man to whom they owed the money began to blackmail them since he was privy to other damaging information about the couple's business venture. Then the associate made a deal. If he could spend the weekend with this man's wife, the huge financial debt would be canceled. Though they were appalled at the thought, they eventually gave in. I'll just give him my body, not my heart. The human rationalized that was impossible, of course. After spending the weekend with the man, her marriage was so badly damaged that eventually she and her husband were divorced. If being in a tight place reveals our character, Moses passed this test with a perfect grade. Admittedly, he had few options, but he did remember to pray rather than to panic. He did remember what he had learned in the early conflicts with Pharaoh. Situations that are out of our control are firmly in God's grasp. Moses and his people were trapped with the Red Sea in front of them, the mountains around them, and the strongest army on earth behind them. If he had reacted as any man might, Moses would have prepared an apology to Pharaoh, promising that he and the Israelites would be his slaves forever. If only their lives were spared, or he might have come apart emotionally and resigned his responsibilities. But he reacted, not by looking ahead to the sea, wondering if he and the people could float across, nor by looking behind to the huge cloud of dust that grew steadily closer. He looked up to God. No matter how high the walls or how deep the ditch, it is always possible to look up to someone who knows everything and who can control the outcome. No doubt Moses remembered the promises of the past. The Israelites, God had told Abraham, would be in the land of Egypt 400 years, and then they would be brought out to go into the land of Canaan. The time was up. God had to preserve his people because his reputation was at stake. Moses also was encouraged by the promises of the present. He heard God's voice. Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. And as for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. Talks about this in Exodus chapter 14. God had a plan that had never even entered Moses' mind. Several promises were clear. First, the Egyptians would be wiped out that day. The Israelites would never again have to confront Pharaoh. They would never have to look into the angry faces of his officers. Never again would they feel the pain of the lash as they baked bricks in the hot sun. Second, God would be glorified through this event. Then the Egyptians would know that I am the Lord, when I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen. God wanted his people to have a good night's sleep before marching through the sea. So he moved the pillar of cloud from the front of the nation to the back of them to provide a shield between them and the Egyptians. The angel of the Lord shifted from God to guardian. When the situation called for the impossible, God was there. What did God ask the people to do? For now, they were to be on standby. They were to get ready to see God work as they had never seen him work before. But Moses said to the people, do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight you. The Lord will fight for you, sorry. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. This was not a time to run, nor a time to fight, and their mouths were to be quiet. This was not a time for screaming in terror or shouting to their friends. This was God's moment, not theirs. He had led them into a corner, and it was his responsibility to find a way out. The people had done what was possible when they sprinkled the blood on their doors in Egypt. They had done what was possible when they packed for the long trip to Canaan. But there are some tight spaces, tight places. Man, I can't read tonight. But there are some tight places in life. There are some difficulties that are so great that we can do nothing at all except look up. Let me read that again. But there are some tight places in life. There are some difficulties that are so great that we can do nothing at all except look up. It appears that Moses himself cried out to the Lord longer than was necessary. Why are you crying to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. And as for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. There is a time to pray and a time to act. Moses stretched out his rod over the sea. The rod had used to herd sheep in Midian, and the miracle began to happen. A strong wind blew that night, parting the waters. Once again, the ordinary rod of Moses became the extraordinary rod of God. In the morning, the Israelites began the trek through the sea bed. They encountered walls of water on either side of them, but Moses gave the command to go, and they obeyed. We can imagine the children scampering down the embankment, picking up stones as they ran. Older men and women walked carefully in studied disbelief. They had doubts, but the plan of God was beginning to become clear. And what the heck? They had doubts, but the plan of God was beginning to become clear. In the distance, they had seen where the shore had been. I'm going to end it right there. I pray everybody have a good night. Peace and blessings.